It's widely considered the single most perfect crime in all of aviation history. We're talking about a heist so clean, so meticulously calculated that it completely humiliated the FBI, baffled the US military, and literally rewrote the rules of airline security forever. For over 5 decades, thousands of federal agents, elite detectives, and amateur sleuths just like us have been asking the exact same question. Who was Dan Cooper? Picture this. It's a cold, stormy night in 1971. A man boards a commercial flight, steals $200,000, and just jumps into a freezing void at 10,000 feet. He leaves behind absolutely no fingerprints, no DNA, and no trace whatsoever. He just vanished into thin air.
So let's open up the official FBI case file, codenamed NORJAC, which stands for Northern Jacket. In this explainer, we're going to walk through the exact timeline, the chilling evidence he left behind, the primary suspects, and some of those classified theories. This is the complete, unfiltered investigation into America's greatest unsolved mystery. Let's get into it.
Let's start right at the beginning with the man in seat 18E. Our story kicks off on November 24, 1971. It's the day before Thanksgiving at Portland International Airport. A man carrying a black briefcase strolls up to the Northwest Orient Airlines counter. He calls himself Dan Cooper, pays in cash, and buys a one-way ticket for Flight 305. It's just a quick 30-minute hop north to Seattle, Washington. Now, according to the witnesses who helped to build the famous FBI composite sketch, this guy looked remarkably ordinary. Imagine a man in his mid-40s, about 6 feet tall, dressed in a sharp, dark business suit, a white-collared shirt, a black clip-on tie, and a mother-of-pearl tie clip. He casually settles into seat 18E, all the way in the very back of the Boeing 727, orders a bourbon and 7-Up from the flight attendant, and calmly lights up a Raleigh filter-tipped cigarette.
Then, things take a turn. Shortly after takeoff, right around 4:35 p.m., Cooper slips a handwritten note to a 23-year-old flight attendant named Florence Schaffner. Now, Schaffner was pretty used to businessmen handing her their phone numbers, so she didn't think much of it and just dropped the note right into her purse without even reading it. But then Cooper leans in closer and whispers a pretty chilling directive. "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." The note itself was written out in very neat, all-capital letters. Following his instructions, she sits down next to him, and Cooper opens his briefcase just enough for her to peek inside. And what she sees is a large battery and 8 red cylinders all wired together.
Here's the crazy part. He wasn't panicked at all. He wasn't acting aggressive. In fact, the crew later described him as thoughtful, calm, and deeply soft-spoken. But his demands? They were incredibly calculated. He specifically wanted $200,000 in negotiable American currency, and it had to be in $20 bills. He also wanted a fuel truck standing by on the tarmac in Seattle. But the real kicker was his request for 4 parachutes, 2 main and 2 reserve. By asking for 4, he was heavily implying that he might take hostages with him on a jump. That was a genius move, because it pretty much guaranteed the authorities wouldn't dare give him sabotaged or non-functional gear.
That brings us to the Seattle standoff and his eventual departure. So Flight 305 ends up circling Seattle for nearly 2 agonizing hours. This was to give the FBI enough time to scramble and gather all that cash in the parachutes. The pilots played it cool, telling the passengers there was just a minor mechanical delay. Crazy enough, the passengers sitting just rows away had absolutely no idea they were hostages in a hijacking. Meanwhile, on the ground, the FBI pulled exactly 10,000 $20 bills from a local bank to hit that $200,000 mark. But they actually did something incredibly clever before handing it over. They ran all 10,000 bills through a high-speed microfilm camera, permanently photographing every single unique serial number. They were banking on the fact that the moment Cooper tried to spend even a single dollar of that money, they'd catch him red-handed.
Let's break down the tense timeline once they hit the tarmac. At 5:46 p.m., the plane lands safely at SeaTac. The authorities bring a 21-pound bag of cash and the parachutes on board, and Cooper makes his trade. He lets all 36 passengers and 2 of the flight attendants go free. But he keeps 1 flight attendant, Tina Mucklow, along with the 3 cockpit crew members. They refueled the jet, and by 7:40 p.m., the plane takes off once again into the night sky.
Now, this is where the explainer gets truly fascinating, because it becomes super clear that Cooper wasn't just guessing on how this plane worked. He gave the pilots some highly specific flight plan directives for their route heading down toward Mexico. He demanded a maximum altitude of 10,000 feet and an airspeed near 100 knots, which is about 170 miles per hour. He also wanted the landing gear left deployed, the wing flaps lowered to exactly 15 degrees, and the cabin to remain unpressurized. All of this builds a really solid profile of a man who had deep, technical aviation knowledge. You see, these specific Boeing 727 mechanics were absolutely vital to prevent the plane from stalling out at such a slow speed, all while allowing him to make a perfectly safe rear exit jump without needing the crew's help.
So, the stage is set for his jump into the abyss.
As the plane heads back up into the pitch-black sky toward a scheduled refueling stop in Reno, Nevada, it's actually being secretly tailed. The military sent up 2 F-106 fighter jets and a T-33 trainer, flying in tight S patterns just to stay completely out of Cooper's sight. Back inside the cabin, Cooper orders Tina Mucklow to lower the aft air stair. Right before she's sent up to the cockpit to wait out the rest of the flight, she gives him this desperate final plea. She says, "Please, please take the bomb with you." Cooper calmly replies that he'll either disarm it or take it. As she closes the curtain to the cockpit, her last glimpse of Cooper is him standing completely alone in the cabin, tying that heavy bag of money around his waist.
Try to picture the sheer hostility of the elements right outside that door. -7 degrees Fahrenheit. That was the temperature outside the plane at that exact moment. Cooper was gearing up to jump out into a pitch-black thunderstorm over the rugged Washington wilderness. He's facing 200-mile-per-hour winds, freezing rain, and 7 below zero temps. And remember, this guy is wearing a business suit and slip-on loafers. No helmet, no heavy flight jacket, no combat boots. Just a suit.
Here are the ticking clock moments of his famous vanishing act. At exactly 8 p.m., a warning light flashes up in the cockpit, letting the pilots know the aft air stair is fully deployed. Then, at 8:13 p.m., the aircraft's tail suddenly pitches upward. It was so forceful, the pilots actually had to manually trim the plane to get it back to level flight. That sudden, massive shift in weight, that was the exact moment Dan Cooper left out into the freezing void. When Flight 305 finally touched down in Reno at 11:02 p.m. with the back stairs still dragging on the runway, the FBI immediately swarmed the plane, but they found an entirely empty cabin. The guy was an absolute phantom.
So, shifting gears from an action thriller into a full-on forensic mystery, let's look at the aftermath and the evidence. What did the massive Norjack investigation actually manage to turn up?
Honestly, Cooper left behind incredibly little. We're talking 1 black JCPenney clip-on tie, a mother-of-pearl tie clip, 8 smoked Raleigh cigarette butts, and a severed reserve parachute canopy, which he'd used to tie the money bag to his body. He actually made a really meticulous effort to retrieve all of his handwritten notes, even going so far as to ask the flight attendant for his matchbook back. But in his rush to make the jump, he made one huge mistake. He accidentally left behind that clip-on tie and, crucially, some of his DNA right along with it.
And hey, we really need to clear up the most famous misconception of this entire case. His name was never actually D.B. Cooper. The alias written on his ticket was Dan Cooper. What happened was a rushed reporter made a wire error during the initial chaos of the story breaking, and the media just ran with D.B. Cooper forever. But what's absolutely fascinating is the FBI's theory on where he actually got the real alias from. Dan Cooper was the name of a hero in a Belgian comic book series that was super popular in French-speaking regions at the time. The character was a Canadian Air Force test pilot famous for his daring aerial exploits and parachute jumps. I mean, it's an incredible, almost unbelievable parallel, right? It heavily points to the hijacker possibly having a military background over in Europe or Canada.
But what about all that money? Well, for nearly a whole decade, not a single $20 bill turned up anywhere. That is, until 1980. An 8-year-old boy was just raking some sand to build a campfire at Tena Bar along the Columbia River when he dug up exactly $5,800 of the ransom cash. The bills were heavily degraded from the elements, but the serial numbers, they were a perfect, exact match. As for the remaining 9,706 bills, they have literally never been found.
Which brings us to the enduring mystery. Out of everyone in the world, who did the FBI actually think pulled this off?
Out of the thousands of leads they chased down, 3 primary suspects really stood out from the pack. First was Jack Koffold, a known con man who was a total dead ringer for the composite sketch and even showed up with leg injuries that he tried to blame on a skydiving accident. Then you had L.D. Cooper, a Korean War vet, whose own family claimed he was completely obsessed with those Dan Cooper comic books. And finally, Dwayne Weber, a man who literally made a deathbed confession to his wife, telling her he was the hijacker. But here's where the forensic science comes in. When the FBI eventually tested the familial DNA left on that black clip-on tie we mentioned earlier, they were able to definitively rule all 3 of these men out.
Finally, in 2016, after 45 years of exhaustively reviewing every single lead, the FBI officially suspended the active Norjack case so they could reallocate their resources. All the physical evidence is still safely preserved in Washington, D.C., but the prevailing belief among many of the agents today is pretty straightforward.
They simply believed that Cooper couldn't have possibly survived that incredibly violent fall into the freezing night.
And that leaves us with the ultimate lingering question of this whole explainer. Did D.B. Cooper actually survive the fall? You really have to weigh the cold, hard evidence, jumping into a freezing thunderstorm over rugged terrain with thousands of unspent bills buried in the sand, against the meticulous, brilliant legend of America's perfect crime. So what do you think? Did he perish out there in the elements, or did he pull off the impossible and walk away into history? I'll let you be the judge of that. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep learning.